Say what you want about egotistical maniacs. They do make good villains. Hello adventurers, I am the Welsh DM, the one Welshman who sacrificed his accent to achieve undead immortality. And we are back with another edition of the Bestiary, exploring how to use iconic monsters in your next TTRPG campaign. And this time we're talking about Liches, perhaps one of the most iconic BBEGs throughout D&D's history. The withered husk of an ancient wizard waiting at the depths of the lair, surrounded by the treasure the party want. Even D&D's most infamous villain, Vecna, is a Lich. They are iconic when it comes to fantasy TTRPGs. I absolutely adore Liches as villains, to the point that I like Vecna so much I wrote an entire book built around his central premise. They creep up in a lot of fiction that I adore, from Nagash in Warhammer to Vecna himself in D&D, and I just think they're an incredibly compelling villain that we can do a lot with narratively. I just wish I saw them used more in D&D campaigns. The high CR of Liches is an obstruction, but that shouldn't stop us from exploring the stories and narratives we can tell with these horrifying villains and exploring the darkness that lies in the hearts of their skeletal chests. As with every bestiary, we're going to start with the themes and tones that are central to the narratives we want to tell, then look at some potential adventure plot hooks that you can use in your own games, before considering the stat block of Liches as it exists currently, and then what we can do to make those final encounters oh so memorable for your players. So let's get started. The best place to start with any monster is the stories and tones that kind of fit their whole deal. And then we can use those to follow the standard or intentionally subvert them in our adventures. At their core, Liches are power-hungry, highly intelligent, effectively immortal, and completely ruthless. Liches are the classic evil wizard trope taken to the absolute extreme, with goals and plans far beyond mortal lifespans and an unsatiated desire for more power. Ignoring the standard nature of the evil wizard trope, it can be a fascinating thing to explore in-game, either as a thinly veiled commentary on capitalism for all you Brennan Lee Mulligan fans, or just a opinionated piece on the overall greed of individuals and the detrimental impact it has on society. But also, above the table, your players aren't that dissimilar. They too are always wanting that next level up, that new power, that next magic item. Are they really that different from the Lich after all? How do they rationalise their own quest for strength and power compared to the Liches? As a GM, the immortality of a Lich is an incredible gift. The ability to have a villain who has these long-term established plans and the time to think about every eventuality gives us a lot of power as a GM. You can use this as a GM combined with your meta-knowledge of the party's plans to showcase a villain that has considered every eventuality and is prepared for the ways in which the forces of good will try to stop them. The party's going to have to get really creative to think outside the box to overcome the Lich's plans. When someone lives for centuries, they've got a long time to think about plans and a long time to build redundancies. Even if the player characters defeat the Lich in a combat, the Lich probably wanted that to happen, has thought about what happens next and what happens when they return to life. Think about the final villain monologue that you'll get off the back of this, as the Lich espouses all of the successes that the party had and how it just led them to this inevitable failure. If you're planning a long-form campaign, you can have the Lich's plans operating in the background, the dark corners as the players go about the early levels of your campaign, such that when they do reach a high enough level to realise that the Lich is at the heart of everything, they can look back and see all of the little things that they didn't notice first time that were all part of the Lich's grand plan. And the last, and I think perhaps most interesting thing to explore with Liches is that concept of mortality and the raging against the coming of death. Only the most egotistical people think they can cheat death, and Liches hate the concept of their own mortality with a fiery passion. They are prepared to go to the ends of the earth to achieve immortality and commit heinous acts to do so. You can explore the concept of mortality within your campaigns when you have the Lich at the centre. Is mortality a gift, or is it a curse? Tolkien himself referred to the ability of men to die as the gift of men compared to the elves' eternal immortality. Is that the case in your game, or is death something to be feared and run away from? How do the player characters come to grips with their own mortality in an adventuring life that is fraught with danger, and are they prepared to let go when the time comes? Or will they sympathise with the Lich and head down a darker path? Now we have a firm grasp on the kinds of stories and narratives we can tell with Liches, we need an actual plot hook to build our adventure around. As always, I've got 3 ideas in this video for stories with a Lich at their core that hopefully excite and entice you into telling a dramatic narrative with these villains. Condemned souls. When the party comes into town and finds everyone a little nervous, but more than anything, not a single sign of criminal activity, how long will it take them to notice that something is wrong? No jaywalking, no littering, not so much as a rowdy swear word in a tavern on a late Friday night. Investigating further, the townsfolk believe there is a curse on the jailhouse and none of them want to find themselves in there. Every time a criminal is put in the jailhouse, within a couple of days they are found dead in their cell, drawn of all life and left an emaciated husk. Fear is rife throughout the populace of this otherwise idyllic and law-abiding town. The truth at the heart of the adventure is the new magistrate in charge of the criminal system in town is a Lich themselves. The Lich claims they are doing good, only taking the life and soul of those condemned criminals. Do the party agree, or is the abhorrent nature of a Lich's need to survive criminal in and of itself? This adventure questions the morality of Liches and whether they can be good depending on how they act. And the ultimately bigger question of what happens when the supply of criminals runs out and the Lich is still in need of a soul. Unwilling Thralls is a risky adventure to start with. This adventure starts with the party being told by a quest giver about a veritable wealth hidden deep within a dungeon just outside of town. The party delve into the dungeon, fight the monsters, and work their way through to the eventual treasure hoard at the centre, wherein waits the Lich. The Lich is far too strong for the party and single-handedly wipes them out, leaving them dead on the floor. A TPK that, as a GM, I strongly advise you warn people about before running this adventure. What happens next, though, is the Lich reanimates the party's corpses, giving them back a semblance of life, but binding them to the Lich's will, forcing them to become the Lich's servants and obey his wishes. This is where the adventure kicks off in full. The party is now tasked with finding A, a way free of the Lich's control, and B, a way back to life in their bodies. All the meanwhile being forced to complete tasks for the Lich. Do the party try and find creative ways to complete the Lich's orders by the letter of the word, but sabotaging their plans? Will the party successfully keep their plans of finding an escape ritual hidden from the Lich, or will the Lich find them and punish them? A little game of cat and mouse working for an evil entity while you yourself try to do good. And finally, we're the villains! How many times have your players wanted to run an evil campaign? Well, here you go. Now it is time for them to find the ritual for Lichdom and achieve that immortality for themselves. They must find the hidden ritual of Lichdom itself, gather the deadly components that it needs, and complete the heinous acts that will eventually tip them over the edge into Lichdom and grant them the immortality they crave. All the meanwhile, the forces of good in the world, the clerics and paladins of the holy churches and other adventuring parties are desperately trying to stop them from achieving this and thwarting their goals at every turn. Can the party earn enough strength and power to stave off the good heroes and reach the destination they so desperately want? Or will they stumble on the path, finally reaching a threshold where they are no longer willing to cross and give up on their quest, potentially splitting the party, some still willing to advance on the path of darkness, others realizing the monsters they have become. Now we have our adventure sorted, it's time to look at the mechanics for the Lich that we're going to use in our campaign. There are multiple different systems, but for the sake of this video we will consider D&D 5th edition, but you can take these notes and apply them to whatever system you are running. As a note, this video is being filmed just before the 2024 5.5e Monster Manual comes out, so maybe the Lich has changed to accommodate some of the things I'm about to mention. But if they haven't, then they'll still possibly apply and you might want to use them for your Lich in your campaign. Now, in my opinion, the original 5e Lich wasn't great. I think it was a little clunky to run for most GMs, especially at high levels, and would struggle with even a mid-sized party to be able to survive and deal enough damage to feel like a threat. So, first things first, we need to review the Lich's survivability. At 135 hit points, the Lich doesn't have that many hit points. Even with its resistances and immunities, it's a fairly easy boss to take down if you have magical weapons. So, I would suggest my standard rule when it comes to running boss fights, max out the monster's HP. In this case for the Lich, it would put them just shy of 200 hit points and give them that little bit more ability to survive when the Paladin does crit them. Also, for the sake of ease, and I expect this to happen in the 5.5e stat block, is move that shield spell to just a reaction that the Lich can take rather than using up spell slots. Just to make it a little bit more apparent that you do have something that can buff the Lich's AC when you need it to. The other thing I would strongly consider with survivability is giving the Lich a healing factor. The fact that they are masters of life and death and yet don't have the ability to recover from wounds feels a bit odd to me. I would probably link it into their phylactery, so provided they are relatively close to the thing, they get that healing factor. We'll cover this more in the next section, but it provides an interesting challenge for the party of do they try and take down the phylactery to stop the Lich from regenerating. Now, the next thing that bugs me about the 5e stat block for the Lich is it's a solo monster, despite the overall tone of a Lich being this necromancer with a horde of undead. They technically have the animate dead spell, but that spell takes a minute to cast, which means they cannot call upon aid in the middle of fight when they are outnumbered by a party of 4 adventurers. The Lich should be surrounded by minions that help them out mechanically in the fight, and the ability to bring those minions back or summon more when they need them. To that end, I would probably introduce a legendary action that allows them to summon 1d6 zombies or skeletons to the field. Just little bits of chaff that can act annoying to the party without tilting the balance of the encounter one way or the other. Speaking of a Lich's magical power, their spell list is rubbish. All of their high level spells are single target focused, from Power Word Kill to Finger of Death. They can't deal damage to multiple adventurers in one go, and thus lack the ability to really scare a whole party at once. This is slightly compensated by the legendary action to throw out a 4d8 cold damage cantrip, but even then, 4d8, which averages to about 18 points of damage, doesn't really scare tier 4 adventurers. So, with that in mind, what I would do is I would modify the legendary action to allow them to cast low-leveled spells, possibly first or second, or if you're feeling particularly spicy, all the way up to third. Instead of just a Ray of Frost cantrip, you can throw out a magic missile attempting to break concentration on the wizard who's focusing on haste. Or the Lich can turn invisible at the end of the fighter's turn and position themselves, move away, stay hidden, increasing the fear of the party as they're lost as to where the Lich has gone, and then suddenly the Lich, bang, unleashes a Finger of Death on the unsuspecting rogue. We can also review the actual spell list they do have a little bit, just to really invoke themselves a little better. I would get rid of the Frightening Gaze legendary action, replace it with the Minions one previously mentioned, and just give the Lich the Fear spell instead, which can then roll into our ability to cast second level spells as a legendary action. Similarly, consider an Ice Knife spell to add a little bit more AoE damage even with lower level spell slots, or even a Misty Step spell such that the Lich can get out of danger when the Barbarian tries to bear hug them to death. It's about giving the Lich options in the fight that makes them feel like the super powerful ancient spellcaster that they actually are. I'm going to pause on pure mechanics for a second and ask you to consider one thing about your Lich. What kind of wizard are they? There is nothing in the Lichdom ritual that has been codified out there that necessitates this wizard being a necromancer. So why make them that all the time? Subvert the expectation of your players and maybe consider a different school of magic that your Lich was an expert in prior to becoming undead. What if your Lich is a conjuration specialist who spends the entire fight summoning devils and demons to aid them in combat? Maybe they're an enchantment specialist focused on taking control of the players' minds and making them fight each other while they cackle maniacally in the background. Or if you really want to get spicy, make them a blade singer. The party will freak out when the Lich, instead of running away from them, runs at them with a magically wreathed green flame sword and begins to whack them about the face with magically empowered strikes. What I'm saying is, increase the diversity of Liches, because it's more fun. Hi there, it's Future Me right now. Since recorded that, I've now seen the new 5.5e Lich, and to their credit, they have done some of the things that I just suggested, so I thought it might be worthwhile just briefly taking a look at it and breaking down what they did change in retrospect to what I've suggested, and what they didn't, and therefore I think you should still probably look at doing if you want to make your Lich even scarier. So, first of all, the Lich is a lot more survivable now, actually going further than I just recommended, with hit points going all the way up to 315 now, more than the 200 I suggested, keeping all of their resistances, and also buffing their AC all the way up to 20, with then shield as a potential reaction on top, making them far tougher and able to handle the kind of tier 4 parties that we're expecting to see. That's great. Much needed for the Lich. It was too much of a glass cannon. Now it's going to be able to survive a handful of rounds against tier 4 parties. As for everything else, however, they haven't really fixed my concerns. There is still nothing in there for them to showcase their ability to summon minions. Still, the only spell they have for that is Animate Dead, which is still listed as the full casting time that it takes rather than an action, which means they've got no ability to bring back minions or bring up minions that they need. In fairness, from a spell casting power level, Liches are now more significant. They can throw out more damage with the multiple Eldritch Bursts or Paralyzing Touches, and spells have been leveled up while remaining relatively simpler than the old 9 levels of spells that you had to pick from. I think where the changes don't go far enough is with the legendary actions. They've made some tweaks. Frightening Gaze is now just a casting of the Fear spell. They've now got a teleport, which is really great and much needed. And they've got a nice kind of AoE damage legendary action in there. The problem is, it still feels quite limiting. Ultimately, you can only use the AoE necrotic damage and the Fear effect once per round. The Fear effect is a concentration spell, so you can't even use it in combination with, say, your invisibility spell, or the ability to cast the Fear spell on subsequent turns, which means the Lich is going to be using their legendary actions to do a burst of necrotic damage and then teleporting the entire time, which to me feels weird. I don't think of Liches as teleporters per se, I just think they need it in their back pocket for when they need it. All that being said, the 2025 5.5e version of the Lich is much better than the original 5e version, but I would still recommend all of the things I just recommended to make them feel more impactful and more in line with the narrative that you're possibly going for with your Lich. Anyway, back to past me to talk about encounters. With the stat block modified to suit our specific Lich, the final encounter is fast approaching and we want it to be memorable. Liches are intelligent masters of spellcraft, arrogant and merciless. How can we represent this when the party come face to face with them in combat? Most importantly, I think we need to focus on the phylactery. It is the Lich's greatest strength, providing them with that immortality, but also their greatest weakness. If the party can destroy it, they can defeat the Lich. Currently, phylacteries do nothing mechanically in D&D, they're just a thing that allows the Lich to come back. But this is where my comment previously comes back. Have the phylactery provide healing to the Lich, provided it's close enough. Give the phylactery a stat block for all I care, make it a 0 movement, high AC, lots of resistances object that the party have to destroy, and give it an action that allows it to heal the Lich at the start of its turn, and give them a reaction such that when the player hits it with a hammer, it gives them a burst of necrotic energy to tell them to stop doing that. The point is, we want to take this iconic feature of a Lich and include it in the final encounter in a meaningful way that forces the party to have to think about it and to weaponize it in their own way. The whole thing becomes a puzzle. Where will the party split their focus? What will be their priority in the final combat, rather than just wailing on the Lich? Adding options to a fight is the key thing that makes it interesting. Speaking of puzzles, a Lich that's lived for centuries is not going to be undefended in their lair, they're probably going to have it trapped. So have it trapped, especially traps that the Lich is immune to themselves. Poison gas is a great example. By doing this in the final fight, in the lair of the Lich themselves, it becomes more of a moving chess match where the arena itself is its own hazard that the party have to think about and deal with. If you combine it with the ability for the Lich to summon minions and have traps or ballista or other weaponry in the room that requires a figure to trigger them, then the party really have to start thinking about dealing with the minions and not just ignoring them until the Lich is dead. Because when they leave that CR skeleton to wander all the way over to pull the lever of the trapdoor underneath the wizard, suddenly that skeleton is much more danger than it was if it was just stabbing the party with a rusty sword. What we're trying to do is have multiple problems that the party have to deal with in this fight to keep them engaged, keep them thinking, and to never let the fight settle into a repetitive routine, while also ensuring that all of the styles of character that the party has find something that they can shine at. Now, thinking as the GM as to how you want to play the Lich, when they are in their lair, functionally immortal, surrounded by traps and minions, they are going to be incredibly arrogant and sure of their victory. This is how you play that Lich. Make them overconfident, make them reckless, because in their own mind, nothing really matters. If they die, they'll come back. If the party kill their minions, they'll reanimate them. And if they take down 2 party members but die themselves, ultimately they're up 2-0. And this then is a flaw that the players can exploit. They can bait the Lich into obvious traps because the Lich is assured of their victory. If they can destroy the phylactery without the Lich knowing, all the better. And the last thing to consider about running a Lich, again more about your own style as a GM, is forget the concept of mercy. Liches left behind mercy a long time ago, and they will be ruthless in that final fight, stopping the party at all costs. Of course, players should understand the inherent risk of fighting a Lich, but maybe you want to discuss this above table a little bit and just be clear with your players that you will not be pulling punches in this fight, and that Lich is here to kill. What does this look like? Well, does that player character keep getting up from 0 hit points with a healing word now and again? Fire magic missile at them, make them fail 3 death saves, and make them use a revivify spell. Does the cleric keep using revivify spells to get people up? Counterspell it. Stop them. Make them panic and realize they are facing a force of centuries of experience and an avatar of death. And does the wizard now start counterspelling the Lich's counterspells? Well, the Lich isn't going to take too kindly to that and will pick on the wizard, ignoring the fighter and barbarian currently hacking away at their back, because how dare that wizard have the temerity to stand up against their own arcane might. As said, make sure your players are comfortable with this before you just start pulling it out of nowhere, but it is par for the course for dealing with the most egotistical, power-mad, merciless villains in all of D&D. And there we have it! I hope you are now ready to use Liches, release them against your players, and explore the exciting narratives in their dark, evil hearts. I personally love Liches so much. Vecna is my favourite D&D villain, as I'm sure you can tell. I think the stories we can tell with them are dramatic and exciting, and probably some of the best you can in D&D. But have you used Liches before? What memorable tales did you tell with these iconic villains? Players, did you fight a Lich? Did you succeed, or did you fall to their skeletal hands? Let me know in the comments below your infamous stories when dealing with Liches. And also down there, fellow GMs, give your own advice for running Liches. What memorable thing did you do that your players still talk about to this day? As always, if you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like. It does appease the undead horror of the algorithm. And if you enjoy this kind of content and want to see more of it, don't forget to hit subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so you're notified when the next video goes up. With all of that said, that's plenty of information to last even a Lich's lifespan. So, until we do this again, you keep an eye out for dragons. I'm going to go see whether I can return my accent to life. And remember to keep telling stories.